And welcome back to another episode with Fight Night Picks. As always, we're brought to you by SimBody. Vertiball is now SimBody. If you head on over to their website, simbody.com, you're going to get all the great products that you know and love, including the SimBody Vertiroller and the Vertiball that you have seen most likely here in studio. Look at that. Place it, lock it, attach it, Vertiball, all sorts of great stuff over there if you want to roll out those old tired muscles and you don't want to go with that old lacrosse ball. They're also coming out with that very new product that you can see right in front of you. And if I head on over to my cart, look at that. I've already got a Vertiball over there. Little bit of a deal right there. And if you hit the try for 60 days risk-free, use the promo code FNP and you're going to get 10% off your order. With that code FNP at simbody.com, you're really helping out another local company here in New Brunswick, Canada. Can't wait for it. The new name, SimBody at simbody.com. And as we always say, let's get into it.
A last look at the big card. Be sure to head into the chat and have your say. Let's get into it and join in Fight Night Picks question mark kicks.
Oh boy, just like that, we're back. And listen, the intro guy's voice sounds different when you're listening through your headphones, but always excited to be back and headed for UFC 283. Coming up today, Matt, we're in separate rooms this time. You're you know, kind of under the weather a little bit, and I'm really excited to, you know, at least get through this. Hopefully you're feeling better. And I know next weekend, it's not like there's a big UFC card. There's not even a big card, period. I went through, I thought, you know what? Maybe we get creative. Maybe we do a Bellator or one championship. There's not really much of anything. I think there's an LFA card. There's not a whole heck of a lot, but I know that we are really excited about this card because Teixeira Hill for the title, Figueiredo Moreno for the title. Everybody made weight except for Anthony Smith, who was the alternate. But you know what? Alessandro Pantoja, give him a slow golf clap. He made weight just in case Figueiredo Moreno falls out. But the chat is popping. Ethan Schneider says that over there. Orlando's hanging out. LFG, Chandler Witt, Todd, Danny. We've got Prince Vegeta-san, who's there every single weekend. Eldar. It is absolutely popping. And Alexis Morris is hanging out as well. Matt, I know you're really amped for this. Obviously, again, terrible to be under the weather, but I know you're amped.
Oh yeah, this is going to be an incredible card. And the great thing about this card is there's 5 or 6 fights that all have a pretty good argument to become kind of fight of the night. Because both Bonfim brothers are in insanely fun matchups today. Gregory Rodriguez, versus Bruno Ferreira. That's an amazing fight. In the co-main event, we've said this multiple times. I could watch Deiveson Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno fight 15 times. I would be excited for every single one of those matchups. And I even think the main event, listen, Glover Teixeira, the worst thing you can do to this man is drop him early. If you hurt this guy in the first round of the fight, that's when you bring the dog out of him. Because when the going gets tough, Glover Teixeira gets pretty darn tough. So I just think there's a lot of fights on this card that you can easily get excited for. And even like Warlley Alves versus Nicolas Dalby, is that a fight that's going to take a lot of headlines? Not really, but that's a fight that's probably going to be an exciting one to watch.
Well, and I mean, I had to bring it up as you're chatting because I don't know if you saw the video that was out there. If you watch those Patrick Gavia documentaries that he does on YouTube, but he did one and it just came out today and it's titled The Oldest Champ in the UFC, Glover Teixeira documentary. He does really good videos like between him and the fighting business. They just missed out there on our nominees for MMA Channel of the Year. Tyler James with the super chat. Thanks for the great weekly content. What's next for Paul Craig / Johnny Walker? Listen, they're kind of hyping this one up as maybe the winner gets a title shot. Like, that's kind of how they've done it. But if you do look at the division, Matt, like Paul Craig 9, Johnny Walker's down below. Like, they're close. And Paul Walker, yikes. Paul Craig's win streak, like, he's really getting close. Like, it's what, 5 in a row right now? Or no, he's 5-1 his last 6 fights. But he's on a bit of a heater. I think Paul Craig definitely has more say than Johnny Walker. But if Johnny Walker does something highlight reel, maybe he gets a guy like a Rakic if I had to look at it that way.
That's kind of the weird thing about this division right now. Like, I know Jamal Hill's getting that big step up in competition today. He is fighting Glover Teixeira, but it really is kind of that top 3, top 4, and then everybody else. Because to me, I look at this fight as kind of, this is both guys' last opportunity to step forward. Because if you lose this fight, then you're just sort of that big name opponent who's going to be fighting the younger guys on their way up. And for a guy like Paul Craig, could he go out there and beat a lot of prospects with his savvy BJJ? Of course he could. But he also has a style to where any of those prospects, if they start laying and clean on the feet, could possibly get a win over him. So I think this is an oddly important matchup just because you wonder how many more opportunities both guys are going to get against those top levels of opposition.
Yeah, and I racked my brain there. Guys, I'm going to be completely honest with you. You guys have a main event coming up in the next month. That's Ryan Spann versus Nikita Krylov. I'm looking for two guys that don't talk very much and can't sell a fight. But if you do look up and down through this listing at light heavyweight, Malone Hart with a giant super chat. The man is a walking MVP of the show. Let's get into it. Great week last week, Allen Brothers. Let's keep it going. We definitely did have a good week last weekend, but Ankalaev doesn't have a fight. Blachowicz doesn't have a fight. Rakic doesn't have a fight. Smith now doesn't have a fight. Uzdemir, and then you're kind of going down like Khalil Roundtree and Thiago Santos, who's now over with the PFL. So, Matt, what we're going to do with the show, we're not even going to talk about Fight of the Night because this is a totally different graphical layout. So we're going to break it down. We're going to go down through all 15 fights on this card. Make sure, again, you hit up that super chat. Malone Hart, Lionheart 1906, Tyler James, they've already hit up the super chat, and that is certainly appreciated. All the support that we get from you folks. If you can 100%. Hit up the super chat, 2 seconds, just toss us that like. I'm going to do my best between the chat that's over there, my Tapology that's here with UFC stats and everything. Matt, you're in front of me on a separate screen. I've got many screens going. I'm juggling a lot of different things in the air at the same time. But what I don't have to juggle is knowing what the first fight is on this card. Saimon Oliveira taking on Daniel Marcos out of Peru. And this has kind of been a contentious fight on this card. And I know a lot of people are kind of split on this one. So we threw it out there. If you look in the YouTube chat, you guys are chatting away, doing a great job over there. But I see it up at the top. You have Glover Teixeira, you have Jamal Hill. There's only 97 votes over there. But we threw this one out there at Fight Night Picks over on Instagram. We do it every single weekend in the poll. 52% right now on Oliveira, 48% on Daniel Marcos. And Matt, I know we kind of touched on this at the start of the week. Your main event, just like this fight, kind of a clash of styles. I know Saimon Oliveira, he will strike, and he does fight out of Astra Fight Team, so you'd expect him to be quite a bit of a striker. But he really likes to grapple in a lot of his fights, even though he's billed as a Muay Thai striker. And for Daniel Marcos, he gets guys hurt. He goes out there, and he will wrestle a little bit. Daniel Marcos is wrestling, though, not really near the level of Saimon Oliveira. And I get it. You might say, well, Oliveira has bad defensive wrestling in his last fight against Tony Gravely. That guy's a really good wrestler. I know he struggled with Javid Bashrat. Tony Gravely is one of the best wrestlers that's going to be out there at 135 pounds, kind of like a Cody Stamann. So, again, I know this is a really fun fight, and I see the comments over there. Chandler Witt saying Marcos won't get taken down. He's used to fighting 5'4" wrestlers. Prince Vegeta-san saying 5'7" to 5'4". Guys, Josiane Nunes is fighting Zarah Fairn coming up, and there's a huge size discrepancy. So it's not really like that, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on this fight.
It is kind of like that, though. Like, the difference between that fight and this fight is Josiane Nunes has 2 knockouts in the UFC, fighting someone who's been finished twice. Marcos, I like the activity that he has, though, and that really will be the key in this fight, because if he does find himself in some of those elongated grappling sequences with a guy like Saimon Oliveira, that's how you get your neck snatched up. Like, Oliveira likes to jump the ghillie if you're Dustin Poirier, and he does it with great efficiency, too. Like, he does have a really good squeeze with that one submission, but the thing is, Oliveira has one of those skill sets that can kind of go either way. He really has to find a good balancing act, because if he does find himself being in a lot of those defensive submission positions, those are really difficult to win rounds from. And if Marcos is able to, again, I agree with you. I'm not saying he should use his wrestling just to win the fight, but be heavy on top when he has to be heavy on top. Use his wrestling mainly to get back up to his feet. Again, I don't want him to go out there and grapple in long sequences in this matchup, but I think the activity from Marcos on the feet is going to be important. His boxing on the inside is quite good, and I do like his ability to throw in combinations, which could give Oliveira some trouble. But that's the thing about this fight. This is one of those early card fight of the night kind of contenders where both guys could get hurt. We could see some fun scrambles from both of them, so it is a hard prediction to make.
Well, and somebody was out there this week giving, and it must have been me in particular, a really hard time, because I kept saying, oh, this fighter, there's 3 fighters on this card. They'll do the pullback, looking for a pullback counter, but instead of countering, they just pull back, and they leave their hands out and their head back, and they don't throw anything, and that's kind of their defense at the same time, and they get hit. Saimon Oliveira is one of those guys that can throw defense for offense, kind of like, and I see it, Mikey James saying nervous for RoboCop fight, but Oliveira will just kind of leave himself out there quite a bit to be countered, and I like that for a guy like Marcos. Marcos has really good leg kicks too, and for Oliveira, he's definitely fought the higher level competition. We all know this right now, and if you do have a look at it, I mean, the big enough favorite in this matchup is Saimon Oliveira. Daniel Marcos is the underdog. But people out there saying the reach must be a mistake. You must have made a typo, Alberto's saying. So I bring it up on the UFC stats website. I'm looking at it right now. Saimon Oliveira, 5'4", reach 72 inches. Daniel Marcos, 5'7", reach of 69 inches. And so I took those from the UFC broadcast as well, but it's there and it is on the UFC's website. So both of us in this matchup going with Daniel Marcos, the striker, out of it. Again, who's got a higher propensity for a finish might actually be Saimon Oliveira. So you might like to go with him, but this is a tricky one to try and pick. Is it not, Matt?
It is, just because of the styles in this fight. They can both go a hard 15 minutes, I would say. I don't really worry about either guy having an overwhelming cardio advantage over the other. And if I did hand it out, I'd probably give that to Marcos, if we're being completely honest. So I do like Daniel Marcos in the matchup. But again, this should be a really fun fight to open the card. Like, I'm actually really excited for this one.
Matt, Shah Reza's hanging out saying, waking up at 4:37 a.m. to catch QMK. Please shout me out, guys. You get the shout out. Thank you for tuning in at 4 a.m. You're a full 12 hours past where we are. Matt, our next fight, we just talked about it. Josiane Nunes taking on Zarah Fairn. I put the pictures out there from Josiane Nunes' weigh-in against Bia Malecki and the face-off against Zarah Fairn. Like, it looks like an atomweight fighting a featherweight, not a featherweight fighting a featherweight. Can you believe that? Like, it's wild.
It is insane. But here's the thing. Josiane Nunes hits like a middleweight. Like, she might look like an atomweight. She got that power in her hands. To quote Shannon Sharp, she'll put them tags on you. And Shannon Sharp almost fought T. Morant last night, Sean Morant's dad. So maybe it is a good comparison to bring up. Huh?
He loves the Grizzlies games.
He's a big cheerleader for LeBron now. But anyways, I just think this is a difficult matchup for Zarah Fairn. And this does feel like it's kind of a, here, stay busy because we don't really have a weight class. Like, it's kind of what this matchup is. Like, for Josiane Nunes, she has looked good in the UFC up until this point. And the big concern was, is her power going to translate in this 145 weight class? Because you're right. Physically, she doesn't really look like she belongs in here. Like, she is a physically strong fighter. It's just her height doesn't really match the heights of a lot of her opponents. But she hasn't really shown a difficulty to close the distance yet. And if that's the only question that you're asking yourself in a matchup like this, and that's the main one I'm asking myself, I find myself just continuously picking Josiane Nunes. She can close the distance. She has insane power when she lands, and I do think she'll be able to land quite consistently in this one.
You know what's funny, and we kind of make fun of the people that that do the UFC rankings. So Josiane Nunes in her UFC debut, August 2021, beats 2-0 Bia Malecki. She's ranked 15th in the UFC's bantamweight division. Matt, there are other fighters out there like a Stephanie Egger. There are some Chelsea Chandler's another one out there. But yeah, Josiane Nunes, let's just give her a number next to her name. She's a giant favorite in this matchup. And when it comes to Zarah Fairn, we touched on this in the video at the start of the week. Her knees are good in the clinch. Her boxing is her strongest strength. Fairn's been training in Brazil for this fight at Devison Figueiredo's camp. But when it does come to this one, I mean, Fairn, we definitely haven't seen it out of her in the UFC. I saw it out of, Dan Tom. You guys know him, Protect Your Neck podcast. We had him nominated for last year's podcast of the year. He did a southpaw look at this week's card, and he talked about this fight, saying Josiane Nunes is a southpaw. And even Fairn struggled when Felicia Spencer would switch her stances and throw a check right hook when she was taking on Fairn. And obviously, that was a finish loss. That was almost 3 years ago. Over 3 years ago, she lost to Megan Anderson. I don't have a lot of faith in a fighter who's 6-4 at 36. I just haven't seen it, but I would definitely stay away from this fight. Because again, Josiane Nunes is a giant favorite, and it's such a weird fight. 86% of the fans at Fight Night Picks in our Instagram poll have Nunes. So what do you make of that?
Like, when Nunes does fight an upper echelon, well-rounded fighter, she is going to struggle. That's just what her style tends to always struggle against. Like, we've seen this story play out many different times. But when she does fight kind of a lower level of opposition, she's probably going to go in there and look like a wrecking machine. And of those up the middle attacks, like, we said the exact same thing about her in the Ramona Pascual fight, and she dealt with all those very easily. So I think it's a good fight for Nunes, but you're right. It's too rich for my blood.
We'll see if she goes out there. And the worst thing that could happen to Nunes is she just draws off the Brazilian crowd energy. She's screaming "Uva Moher" in her head. And then she gasses out in the first round. She gets pieced apart round 2, round 3. Kind of like that Willie Cat fight against John Castaneda. But Matt, we'll move on to our next fight. There's definitely going to be the chance there. Warlley Alves taking on Nicolas Dalby. I know people are going to be amped up and excited about this one. Odds are really close. This was a pick 'em at the start of the week. Alves is a slight favorite in this one. And if we go down through the comments, Matt, Eagles 1985 saying, hit that like button, almost 300 tuning in right now. Not a ton of likes, so it takes 2 seconds. But when you do look at this matchup, Matt, the highs for both of these guys, we know how good Warlley Alves can be on his best days. Win over Mounir Lazzez, where he just kicked him to the body 3 times. Maybe he broke his rib, maybe didn't, but he made him shut down. He got the TKO win there. But then there's other fights where he just kind of looks a little lackadaisical. And I don't mean that to be negative with him, but there's just some fights that it's not the Warlley Alves that we know, the beat Colby Covington, like the fight that he had against Randy Brown. Obviously, he lost to a guy whose nickname was and he's not allowed to coach anymore. And for Nicolas Dalby, like his loss to Tim Means, his win over Daniel Rodriguez is even a little bit of a surprise, but it's definitely his loss to Jesse Ronson. I know for Dalby, he struggled against the takedowns early against Claudio Silva, recently retired this week. I saw Hannibal retired. So Claudio Silva, one of my all-time favorites. I'm like the only one that's ever going to say that. But again, I know this is a fight that you're excited about. Real fight fans are definitely going to be excited about this one because these two guys are exciting in their own way.
They definitely are, but this is another one of those, like, how many more chances are you going to get? And I know that's kind of wild to say about Alves, who is only 32 years old, but he's been around the block for a very long time now. Like, when we bring up some of his best wins, they're from, like, UFC 200. Like, he beat Colby Covington almost 10 years ago now. So, for Alves, it is one of those, like, what have you done for me lately kind of deals. And yes, he is very up and down, but both these guys tend to be those peak and valley types of fighters. The difference is, Nicolas Dalby, I would say, is a little bit more consistent. Like, for the most part, he's going to shell up. He's going to fight in a sound defensive manner. Like, the holes that he leaves open aren't going to be as wide as some of the ones that Warlley will, because when Warlley isn't on his A game, it is tough. Like, he's getting taken down. He's getting out grappled. He just kind of looks confused in some areas. And if that's the version of Warlley that we get today, then Nicolas Dalby might be able to grind his way to a decision win. But I look at these guys in a very similar light. Like, I don't think Warlley's going to fall off a cliff in the 3rd round. I think they're going to fight at a fairly consistent pace. And that's the thing about both these guys. You brought it up, I think, quite heavily in the prediction videos. And I agree 100%. Dalby's not a big kicker. So if Alves can stay on the outside, really use some of those kicks that we have seen in the past, then maybe he could not dominate the outside, but have success on the outside. On the inside, Warlley's definitely the more talented grappler out of the two. And that's why I do find myself picking Warlley. I do worry that, hey, could this be one of those duds of a performance? Yes, it could be, but the highs are definitely higher. Wow. And I guess that's what I'm picking.
And Lord Nikon hits it on the head saying pop and popcorn fight to a T. Glob Ross with the big super chat. Hey guys, happy fight night. Got a few parlays going. Breakdowns always giving me some extra confidence for the picks. Thanks again. Glob Ross, thank you for the super chat. That's much appreciated. And there was another comment right out there, and it was from, and I want to make sure I get it right, Neon Bones saying Alves lost to Randy Brown in Brazil. That was one of the best fight posters the UFC's made. Blachowicz versus Jacare with like the red and green down the middle, and they were all kind of like
one of the worst main events they've ever had, though.
Yeah, that was a terrible. Let's just play around the cage for the entire thing. But in that matchup, yeah, Warlley Alves lost on the prelims. And that was, that was a tough one. Sandwiched between D. Silva, who beat the bantamweight GOAT, Renan Barão, and Francisco Trinaldo beating Bobby Green. And Bobby Green definitely won that fight. But Matt, I do like this fight. Again, for me, Dalby's one of those guys, and he's always doing something. And people are always like, oh, he's really tired. But he does that breathing from the first minute of the fight. He's always doing it. You kind of talked about Nicolas Dalby a little bit. Sometimes he can load up on some of his shots when he goes in, kind of like a Darren Till a little bit. But I do like Dalby for all the packages. He's definitely the more consistent guy, having, decent cardio, always doing something. But he struggles with the threat of the takedown. He struggles with some of the kicks. And listen, Alves is the heavier handed of these two guys. It's just which version of Alves do we get? I don't know. I'm picking Alves in the matchup, but again, it's not one of the more confident ones that's on the card, just because these guys are the poster childs for what version are we going to get. And this was the video where I referenced Robot Chicken for anybody that got the Vegetable Fun Fest reference.
And we haven't mentioned it much yet, but Dalby is 38. Like, at a certain point, we are going to see a significant regression. Like, maybe he's probably not in his prime anymore. Let's just call it what it is. So at a certain point, we will see Dalby slow down. I'm not saying Father Time's going to touch him as he's walking into the cage today. It's just something to expect in the near future.
Yeah, DC saying Alves didn't look good on the scales. I'm going Dalby by decision. And listen, if you're going Dalby, I'm here to listen to it. Pulse Reloaded saying he got viciously KO'd by Jeremiah Wells. And that was even lax today. He was just kind of like backing up, and Wells was running forward with his fists flying. our next fight, Matt, this is another one of those ones. Like Terrance McKinney, you talk about a guy marketing himself well on Twitter. Like he put out that kind of like wanted poster, and it was like, you got to look out for Ismael Bonfim for his own safety and his own regard. Ismael Bonfim taking this fight, UFC debut. Both of the Bonfim brothers getting their shot in the UFC off of Dana White's Contender Series. They both fought last summer on the same card. We were very excited for both of them. But for Ismael, he's got such a breadth to his game. So many different parts and parcels. And you might know him for the fact that he is a good boxer, but he's also a very good grappler. Now, defensive grappling might not be the best, and that might cause him some issues in this matchup against such a good wrestler in Terrance McKinney. And you might go, well, Craig, he's a knockout artist. But guys, wrestling's Terrance McKinney's base, and he always talks about the fact that he wants to use it. I know against his Farazim, or in his fight against Farazim, he was able to kind of capitalize on the slip with the leg kick. See, I tried to throw a bunch of words together. I'm so excited about this one. But in this fight, Matt, like Prince Vegeta's son, Terrance McKinney is like everybody's favorite fighter. That's an analyst. It makes me want him to be either really great or to get smashed. Well, that's kind of good and kind of harsh at the same time. But again, a lot of people really do like Terrance McKinney. I really do like this fight because I feel like a lot of the North American audience is going to be all over McKinney and singing his praises. And I feel like not enough people are going to focus on Bonfim, which hopefully we did a decent job of in our video at the start of the week. I hope.
If you guys watched the Contender Series content we did this summer, I was really high on the Bonfim brothers, both of them. Like, they are both extremely technical on the feet, can make you pay with combinations, not just power shots, which is a really nice thing to see. But this is one of those rare fights where it's like a positive and a negative on a magnet. So close, yet so far apart. Like, this is a very close fight, but it's probably going to be one-sided as all get out by the time the fight gets here. Like, McKinney could completely knock out Bonfim in the first 10 seconds of this fight. Vice versa could happen, though, too, and I wouldn't really be surprised, even though I'm saying, like, this is a very close matchup. And the funny thing was, I saw what the odds were round by round. McKinney's like a plus 600 in the first round, then it drops to like plus 1700. Basically, McKinney's only a favorite in this fight in the first round. He only has better odds to win by finish in the first round, and then Bonfim actually has better odds to win in the second and the third. It's just that McKinney has the highest odds to win in the first round. I just thought that was really interesting. Like, a lot of people are putting a lot of pressure on the fact that McKinney is that fast starter, and he is true. Like, when McKinney hits guys with power shots, unless you're Drew Dober, and I think Drew Dober up until this point has proven that he is like a 1-of-1 with his durability, not many people can withstand his power shots. So I will be interested to see if Ismael Bonfim is going to be comfortable in the pocket, because that's where he's going to have to get a lot of his work done. If he can slip some of those shots, go to the body, go to the head, I can see Bonfim having a lot of success. I just think this is one of those cases where I'm really impressed by the prospect. I just think this is a really difficult matchup to give him this early on in his UFC career. That's all. Like, Bonfim could go off and win 6-7 fights in a row. I just think this is a really tough fight for him to make his debut with. You're muted.
And I'm trying to have a look at the same time, and at the fight, at everything that's going on. And there was a question up there in the comment section. This is what I was trying to find. Where somebody, so it was Nellie Morris, says, what the hell ever happened to Tucker from out east? Where is this guy? Listen, I don't know. Dan Ige, maybe just, I don't know. Like, it was like when he lost to Rick Glenn, and then he was just gone for a really long time, and then came back and looked pretty good. So Gavin Tucker, hard to say where he is, but I would expect him to be at that Fight League Atlantic show that John Morgan's going to be at, because there's a lot of fighters out of Nova Scotia that fight on those cards. Matt, when we do look at this one, again, the fan favorite is McKinney. 75% of the fans at Fight Night Picks over on Instagram taking McKinney to get the win. For me, I just like the work rate out of Ismael Bonfim, and I like the defensive boxing and the reflexes that he has on the outside. He's a guy that can punch side to side, forwards and backwards. McKinney's a guy that punches forwards. And that's kind of it. Now, when it lands, he hits really, really hard. And again, his wrestling is definitely better than Ismael Bonfim's. We know this for sure. But for me, I like the opportunity with a guy like Ismael Bonfim. And it's that 18-3 is a really good 18-3 type of sample size. There's some other guys on this card. Luan Lacerda is kind of one of those guys where the record doesn't really reflect it. But for me, again, I'm going to take Bonfim here and go out on a limb and go with a little bit of an underdog in this one and have some fun. We move into the next fight, Matt. And that old dog, Shamil Abdurakhimov, isn't he back? 263. So he's a little bit heavier than some of his other fights. And for Jailton Almeida, he's also a little bit heavier than some of his other fights. So a lot of people were talking, Matt, and I don't know if you agree, disagree. Do you think Jailton Almeida is going to be one of those guys that kind of sticks around at heavyweight at 232, or is this just like, hey, I've been getting ready for this. This is the third time I've accepted the fight against Abdurakhimov. I'm willing and ready at heavyweight.
How many more heavyweights are skilled than Jailton Almeida? Like, we're just sitting here right now listing them off the top of our heads. Cyril Gahn, I'll give you that probably. Like, he's a really good technician. Not as much of a grappler, kind of the yin to his yang. They're in different areas. Stipe's good at boxing. But my point is, like,
Francis is the best wrestler we've ever seen.
Well, exactly. Francis is so cool.
He's like a new Fedor.
I'm going to miss him a lot. But anyways, my point is with Jailton Almeida, the heavyweight division's wide open right now. And I know Curtis Blaydes is going to offer him a very difficult stylistic matchup just because of his wrestling and how heavy he's going to be from that top position. Because the only thing Curtis Blaydes has struggled with is probably one of the two most heavy-handed fighters we've ever seen in the heavyweight division, Derek Lewis and Francis Ngannou. And other than that, he takes everybody else down and smothers them. So I think Almeida would have trouble in a matchup like that. But I'm glad you brought it up about Abdurakhimov weighing heavier. And I know Almeida did too, but I think that's more of a case of, hey, I'm just going to settle into this division because a lot of guys have had success in that 230 to 245 range. We talked about this a lot, like Prime Kane, Prime JDS, Prime Stipe. Like, those might be the three best heavyweights of all time. Prime Fedor, too. Like, and none of them are big athletes. Like, yes, Francis is big, but even by the end when he was champion, he was weighing in more at like 260, not really at that 265 limit. So I think for Jailton Almeida, he can go out there and look really good for a long time. I just think that Curtis Blaydes matchup is going to be a really difficult one for him with the wrestling edge. And maybe this one against Shamil Abdurakhimov is a good precursor to getting to that fight. But other than just learning more about the career of Jailton Almeida and what he's going to be good at, what he's going to struggle with, I don't know what Shamil is going to really offer him in terms of question marks.
Well, and I mean, when you do look at it, like Shamil, and we touched on this in the video, the fact that he's a master of sport and not something that you'd assume with Shamil Abdurakhimov. You just watch his fight against Derek Lewis. Well, he's a master of sport in combat sambo. See, that's a word I always like to put together, combo sambat, but it's combat sambo. But when you look at it, he's a national master of sport in wushu sanda, which is Chinese kickboxing, and he's an international master of sport in kickboxing. Shamil, the guy that you see on the right hand of the screen that's not wearing the Raptors toque. And if you go through all of his weigh-ins in the UFC, against Tim Johnson, 255, 254, 256, 253, 261 against Chase Sherman, 256, 258, 257, 258, 258. And then for this fight, he weighed in at 263. Now, it's not a big deviation out of the mean, but it is the heaviest that he's ever weighed for a UFC contest. And so far, he's 5-5 in the UFC. I just look at it as Shamil, he struggled with some of the things that, can play into the hand of Jailton Almeida when Abdurakhimov fought Curtis Blaydes. And that was a bit of a hometown fight, being in Abu Dhabi, a little bit closer to his native country. So it is a good opportunity for Almeida. And if he could have that success against a guy like Parker Porter, I know Parker Porter's nowhere near a ranked fighter right now, nor has he ever been, unless it was when he walked into the cage to fight John Jones. But for Almeida, the things that worry me about him and his game, his defense, when it comes to striking, he leaves his head up and out, and then he punches his way in. He could definitely get caught, countered, knocked out. And if Shamil Abdurakhimov did that, it would surprise the world. But Shamil
that's
struggled.
My big point.
Yeah.
Sorry, if Almeida did go down to
ahead.
205, like, you have to fight Yuri Prochazka at a certain point. If you have bad striking defense, that's the last man in the world you ever want to see in a cage. Like, the top guys at 205, if you are going to give up a little bit of durability, if you're going to give up a little bit of your gas tank to make that weight cut, because that's the thing about Jailton. He's not so small that there's no negatives that would come along with making a cut like that.
No, and a good point made up there in the comment section. Eldar saying the last time Shamil won was 2019. It was April of 2019. He beat a guy who was on our MMA nickname tier list near the middle to the bottom, Tybor Marcin Tybura. That was Abdurkhimov's last win. Matt, over 400 tuning in. A quarter of you have tossed a like. It would be much appreciated. You guys are rocking and rolling for UFC 283. Gabriel Bonfim's taking on the sniper, Mounir Lazzez. And this is another one where, okay, you have a Brazilian fighter making their debut. They're undefeated. They're a former super welterweight champ in boxing in Brazil against not good competition. But for Gabriel Bonfim being 25 in this division, Matt, your athletic prime in MMA, 28 to 33. I mean, Gabriel Bonfim's not even of that ilk. And if you look at Mounir Lazzez, he's 38, but not a lot of miles on that road dog. I mean, he's 11-2. He has that one loss in the UFC, but for Lazzez, just in the UFC, he beats Abdulrazak Al-Hassan in a fight of the night. He loses to Warlley Alves, where for some reason he thought, hey, I'm going to clinch up with Warlley Alves. That's going to be a good thing. Didn't work out for him when they broke. And then he beats Ange Loosa and looked amazing in the fight against Ange Loosa at distance. If this fight's at distance, Lazzez taller. Kind of. I mean, they're the same height. Lazzez has more reach.
Kicks, though. Yeah.
That's for sure. Lazzez is one of those guys that can operate on the outside and circle around for 15 minutes, and you're going to go, where's that time that I'm never going to get back from watching that? But Mounir Lazzez can do that, and he is the technician. Bonfim's got to close that distance. So this, to me, is one of those fights where there might be some people disappointed if it is Lazzez that gets the win, but I think it is a really fun fight for sure.
It is. This is an easier fight than the one Ismael has to have, but that's the thing. Like, the UFC has two pretty fun prospects on their hands who just so happen to be brothers. It's weird that they're giving them oddly difficult matchups on a pay-per-view to start their careers, especially based on how much hype they generated coming off Contender Series, because outside of Joe Pyfer and Bo Nickel, there's a pretty good argument to be made that the Bonfim brothers would be 3-4, 3A and 3B for the next biggest prospects coming off that show. So I do think that they were more deserving, and this sounds terrible, but it is the truth. More of like an underhand toss UFC debut, because Terrance McKinney is an MF for to fight. I think we can all agree on that. Like, I know you have Bonfim, I have McKinney, but it's a really close fight. Like, that's a difficult fight for both of those guys. This is a very similar situation where Mounir Lazzez probably isn't of the caliber of a Terrance McKinney. McKinney's still trying to get to the top of the division and prove that he is one of the better fighters there. Whereas Lazzez, like you said, he's 35. He's a little bit past it, perhaps. But I think it's going to be a really unique test for Gabriel Bonfim. But the good thing that Bonfim does have, and you brought it up, Lazzez is great at moving. Bonfim's pretty good at cutting off the cage, and he makes it feel pretty claustrophobic when he is able to get on the inside with some of his shots. He reminds me a little bit, and I know this is a comparison at the highest level, but you know Robert Whittaker's really good at getting you to go to the cage, and then whichever direction you pick, he makes you pay for it. Gabriel Bonfim can angle himself that way to be really intelligent of a striker in that capacity, and I think that's going to be a key in this fight. If he can make it uncomfortable for Lazzez, get his back up against the cage to where he can't pull back, he has to be a much more stationary target. That should help Bonfim quite a bit.
This one, honestly, folks, I have a hard time trying to make a pick in this fight. I think it's really, really, really close, so it will be a tough one. When we have a look at the fan vote, 69% with Bonfim and 31% with Mounir Lazzez. And if Matt, we go down through the comment sections here. Wayne Kerr hitting up the super chat. He likes both Bonfim brothers. T. Way saying you guys need bigger broadcasting because you're good at what you do. Well, you just got to tell your friends, I guess. You got to toss a like. You got to let the people know what's going on. Now, Matt's got himself muted, but in this matchup, I do have Bonfim ever so slightly. But again, I think I've laid out the game plan for Mounir Lazzez the entire week. I think he's got a really good shot in this one. And for Lazzez, he throws a decent amount of leg kicks just to the leg. He's not going to attack your body very much. But with Lazzez, it can be a varied attack, and it keeps going for all 3 rounds. So Lazzez might be the pick for some in this one. I'm going with Bonfim ever so slightly. And I realized we missed the fight, Matt. Cody Stamann's taking on Luan Lacerda. And for Lacerda, coming out of Nova União, you might expect a striker. False. Luan Lacerda is a grappler, and he loves to wear his little rinky-dink shorts to the gym and in every single one of his fights where they're Muay Thai trunks with a friggin' black belt wrapped around them. And he goes out there and he strikes a little bit, and then he takes guys down, and he is a black belt to the nth degree. And last weekend we had Nick Fiore that was a good black belt. We had Nick Aguirre that wasn't a black belt, but Nick Aguirre is a good grappler. But both of those guys are really powerful to get their takedowns, and they didn't fight higher level competition. Now for Lacerda, he hasn't really fought like anybody even close to Cody Stamann. We do know this. And he's fought some decent names. He did fight Raulian Paiva, who just got released by the UFC. That was a little bit of a surprise. But when you do look at a guy like Luan Lacerda, he offers up those little X's and O's that kind of fit into some of the gaps that Cody Stamann shown, at least at the UFC level, with the submission defense and with some of the mistakes that he can make on the feet.
J.R. Smith said something really interesting once about when the Cavs were playing the Golden State Warriors in the finals all those years. And it was, hey, and it's really disrespectful to this team, but I agree with it wholeheartedly. He goes, the first 2 games you play against Golden State, you're going to lose. You know why? You've been playing Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan as the hardest series in your conference every single time. And now you're up against Stephen Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, and Kevin Durant. There's a bit of a shock that gets to your system when you go up against a super team like that after you've been in a weaker conference beating up on teams that you're expected to beat. Cody Stamann's been one of the best fighters in the division for a while now, and understandably, he may not have achieved the heights that were set for him at a certain point because Cody Stamann was looked at as kind of the premier primary wrestle boxer in this division for a long time, and he was kind of the uncrowned king of, hey, he could be the next Jimmy Rivera, right? And Ricky Simone has kind of set himself up to be that next guy in this division, and he's maybe even a little bit more than some of those other guys.
Ricky Simone. Hey, Tank, sure. Enjoy featherweight. Have fun with that. Ricky Simone, that guy.
My point is, Cody Stamann has fought some of the better fighters in this division, and I know he's come up short against some of them, but like, we don't completely get rid of Derek Brunson every time he's in a matchup, you know? Like,
no, I mean, well, Cody Stamann's beaten some guys. He hasn't beaten the best guys in the division. His best win is a split decision.
Some of the best in the division is what I said.
Yes,
like, if you lose to Merab, Said Nurmagomedov, and Jimmy Rivera, I don't really care. I know the Rivera loss in hindsight might not look great because even Rivera at that stage of his career wasn't necessarily in his prime, but still, he does offer a lot of the same skill sets that Cody Stamann does, and he has a much higher work rate on the feet. Lacerda's not a great striker on the feet, doesn't have a crazy high work rate, and I do think he's going to struggle a lot in the defensive wrestling aspect of this fight, so I just don't know what Lacerda's going to be able to do to go out there and get 15 minutes. He might be able to capitalize on mistakes in a few different positions, but I don't know what he's going to be able to do to really impact himself on this fight.
Yeah, and I see Butterroll saying, wasn't Stamann a prospect? I mean, everybody's a prospect at a certain point, but Stamann, when he fought Aljamain Sterling, was ranked 10th in the bantamweight division. He was 17-1. Now, he was a pretty big underdog in that fight against Sterling. If I bring it up right now, it says slight. I'm pretty sure it was a little bit bigger, but Sterling was able to get that kind of knee bar Sulev stretch, and people kind of, they were all over the place.
A Sulev stretch, and they're the same thing.
No, hear me out. They were all over the place on whether it was or whether it wasn't. However, later on that card, Zabit Magomedsharipov definitely kind of stole the night, had the better submission out of the two. But when you do look at this matchup, Matt, yeah, you just don't like Zabit. You never did.
No, Craig, beating Brandon Davis isn't as good as beating Cody Stamann.
It was a more impactful finish. It was a more impactful finish. But when you look at this matchup, Matt, for me, I think for Stamann, his hands have gotten better at Extreme Couture. I do like him more in this matchup. For me, with Luan Lacerda, he struggles mightily with the striking defense. And when I look at a guy like Lacerda, his takedowns are great. He can kind of go, again, Kimura and then roll into top position. He can grab your knee like a guy like Sterling can do and offer up a lot of issues. So, again, Luan Lacerda is a really, really tricky fighter. He could definitely offer up some of those things that a Cody Stamann struggled with. But for me, I'll go with Stamann. It's a really weird fight. So eager to see what Luan Lacerda looks like in a matchup like this, because this fight was announced in early December, and both guys have had very, very long camps for this one. So, Matt, our next fight, you're very excited about this one. Milk Costa, your guy, taking on Thiago Moises. And again, I saw Dan Tom talk about this on his Twitter, but when you look at Thiago Moises, it was kind of the same point that we made at the start of the week. When was the last time he fought a southpaw? Because I remember, and he looked terrible against that southpaw until he snatched up the leg. And that was Michael Johnson. I got great news.
Everybody fights from the same position when they're flat on their back defending submissions. Everybody does. Every single person known to man is ambidextrous when it comes to grappling. And that's the thing about Thiago Moises. You can get hung up about his shortcomings on the feet, but why bother? Because they have always been there and they are always going to be there. You can just focus on what his strengths are, what his weaknesses are. I don't care if you're orthodox or southpaw. You're probably going to beat Thiago Moises on the feet. Like, I don't really think the stance has anything to do with it. I just think he happens to be a specialist with his own grappling. And I understand that sometimes defensively, if you're another guy who's a really good grappler, you can make him pay with some of those ground and pound positions that we have seen him struggle with in the past. Joel Alvarez finish was absolutely disgusting. Like, that was a really bad one. And Joel Alvarez is a guy you kind of forget about. He's kind of like a Jamal Moshburn. Like, unless you were there, you probably don't remember him all that well. But still, Alvarez had some really fun fights in the UFC. It was a really fun specialist with his style of grappling. Also was the biggest lightweight you will ever see in your entire life.
Well, I mean, Elder saying Moises will beat him up in the stand-up. Easy win for Moises. Moises going to destroy this kid. Go watch some Milk Costa tape, guys. Because, I mean, this guy is a very, very special prospect. Now, he's in a position like Luan Lacerda, even Bonfim to make a debut against a guy like Terrance McKinney. Like, they're putting Milk Costa in there against a really, really good fighter in his UFC debut. So it is really hard that way. But when I do consider it, like, Milk Costa, guys, like, you go down through his fights and he's fought a good level of competition. That's the other part about it. It's not like he's just been fighting nobodies, but it's fight against Junior Mello. He throws that spinning body kick, and then he just ends up finishing him, and he continues to punish him to the body. He's had some good fights against some good fighters. Now, I know there's some, some binary 1-0, 0-1, 4-0. But if you do just consider even his fight against Italo Gomes, which was the main event of LFA 132 back in May of last year, he lost that fight by decision. A lot of people thought that Costa won 2 of those rounds. Costa is the much better fighter on the feet than Thiago Moises by far. He's got fast hands. He's got great kicks at all 3 levels. He is a very, very fun fighter to watch. I don't think he's on Moises' level on the ground. That's the thing for me. Like, you look at Mel Costa, and he tries to get squirrely with it and like squirmy wormy when he's on the ground. And that's the trouble. He's going to give up something when he's on the ground if he's there with Moises. So for me, again, Chris McDowell, come on, Craig, stop it. He's getting smashed. Mel Costa is a very, very good fighter. If he wins this fight, he's a very, very good prospect, and I expect Costa to be around for a long time. To me, again, it's a little bit too much too soon against Moises, but if Costa won, it would not surprise me in the slightest.
It's just, if we're going to bring up level of opposition, like Bobby Green, Alexander Hernandez, Islam Makhachev, Joel Alvarez, Christos Giagos, those are all phenomenal fighters. Like, I know Christos Giagos isn't a ranked guy, and Bobby Green might not be the best fighter in the world, but those are all like UFC caliber fighters who have been around for a long time and have very distinct and unique skill sets. We've seen Moises look pretty good against against just a good variety of opposition. So I like Moises for all those reasons. And again, you're right. Like, Costa creates a little bit too much separation on the ground. Like, a lot of the times we get on people who just do that lockdown, but against a guy like Moises, the less amount of movement that you give him, the less that he's going to be able to learn off of that and then try to get you into submission.
Yeah, Moises almost died in the cage like 4 or 5 years ago when a guy held a submission and he was unconscious for like 90 seconds.
No, Moises didn't. Melk did.
No, yeah, Melk did. Melk nearly died in the cage. You never want to see that. Matt, Gregory Rodriguez taking on Bruno Ferreira. You look at this matchup. We're live on Twitter. We're live on Facebook. We're live on YouTube, all at the same time. It's wildness. Almost 500 tuning in right now. A like goes a long way. Matt, you're under the weather. We're in two different locations. We're filming. We're having a good time. We're not going to do the sidekick because when you're not feeling good and you're staying up all night, that's just a recipe for disaster. But Matt, Gregory Rodriguez, I mean, that cut, those stitches, are they dissolved? I don't know. That's never good. He had that crazy fight his last time out, and he gets the win, and everybody's happy for him. But we're going to see how Gregory Rodriguez is able to rebound off of that last matchup where he got the win over Chidi Njokuani about 4 months ago. He's taking on Bruno Ferreira that won against Leon Aliu in the main event of a Dana White's Contender Series. If I'm not mistaken, that was week 9. Knocked him out. Ferreira has got those hands. Ferreira, black belt in judo and Brazilian jiu-jitsu. These two guys, for what it's worth, their backgrounds are pretty much the same, and they're both very heavy-handed. And the southpaw in the matchup is Bruno Ferreira. Even though he'll kind of mix it up a little bit, he's got a little bit of a reset to it. He'll do it almost to a fault, like he moves too much for my liking, but he knocks everybody dead. So what can I say, right?
And that's the big thing about this matchup. Like, if Bruno lands on Gregory, it might be over. And that's my big worry about Gregory Rodriguez. You can't fight like this forever. You just can't. Like, even Justin Gaethje, we're starting to see, like, maybe not the decline of Gaethje, but, like, he can't just withstand everything anymore. Like, Oliveira dropped him with one shot on the feet. Like, when you fight in that car crash kind of way, it starts to chip away at you.
Well, and I mean, a super chat from GVCKD spams L2. Thank you for the super chat over there. But, Matt, when it does come down to this one, yeah, like, and then all of a sudden, poor Justin Gaethje's taking on Fiziev. That's going to be a tough fight. It's going to be a good fight.
I'm so excited for that main event. Like, those two guys for 25 minutes is going to be incredible, because if Fiziev proved anything against RDA, he carries his power pretty late, and that's going to be a great fight between those guys. But it's weird because Gregory Rodriguez is a more kind of fleshed out version of Bruno. Like, he has a lot of the in-between skill sets that you look for, but he also is susceptible to Bruno's big kind of skill, which is his power, which are the hooks. So I'm picking Gregory Rodriguez, but I'm picking him knowing full well that, hey, anytime he fights one of these big power punchers, he's going to be open to getting hit by those big shots. And I know he had one of the better comebacks of all time, I'd say, against Chidi Njokuani the last time out. Like, the cut could have stopped the fight. He was rocked about 14 times in the first round of that fight, and that worries me. I know he didn't get knocked out, but under 4 months ago, he did eat a lot of clean shots. You do worry about just how much he has been able to recover since that time.
Well, and that's the crazy thing about the matchup. And if you look at it for a guy like Bruno, I mean, 9 wins, 6 by knockout, 3 by sub, 7 of them in the first round and 2 of them in the second round. He's never been in a third round in his pro MMA career. He trains with a guy that's going to get you ready for a matchup like this. And Bruno Silva, whatever you think of Bruno Silva, I mean, the guy was pretty damn good with M1. He's had some fun fights in the UFC, even the one that he had against the now champ, Alex Pereira. But you look at it for Pereira, you want a game plan. Smaller Jordan Williams, southpaw, was able to knock out Gregory Rodriguez on Dana White's Contender Series. It would not be out of the realm of possibility if Ferreira finishes Rodriguez. I agree with you. I think Rodriguez is a much more fleshed out version. And for that reason, I like him in this matchup. I mean, he was able to get near the top of the mountain or the top of the mountain over with LFA when he was able to kind of go through their tournament that they had. And in the UFC, he's had some good fights. But again, he gets hit a lot. He's nearly been finished or he's been finished. This is like the most chintzy call in the entire card. And if you get it wrong, Matt, I'm sure there's going to be boo birds out there that said, oh, you should have picked Bruno. I'm right on the fence, guys. It's a really, really tough one. And then we get into the next fight, Matt. Mauricio Shogun Rua. He's had the support of the world this fight week. And listen, I love it because every single time Shogun's fought in the last, I don't know, forever, everybody's been down on it. I forgot to say this in the video. You go back and watch his last fight, the rematch against OSP, and from the second half of the first round to the end of the fight when they're reading the decision, the fans booed the heck out of that fight. They booed the whole time. I don't know how they filled their lungs with more air to boo even louder because they booed the hell out of OSP Shogun. But Shogun, other than like the early first round blitzes, it hasn't been the same in a long time. I know his record of late is quite good, but for Shogun, he gets Ihor Potieria, and we spent about 8 minutes of our video telling you, Ihor, the good is good, the bad is bad. He's never fought anybody that's very good, and he has a very polished record. So this, as easy as it should be, or as cut and dry as it feels to pick the younger fighter in this one, it's a bad fight, and it's a weird fight.
I think you're selling wolf tickets, Craig. I gotta disagree. I think it's it for Shogun.
Matt, they would have given Shogun a pretty friggin' easy fight and a send-off in his retirement fight in Brazil.
Like when BJ Penn fought, yeah, you're Rodriguez. Do you want other examples?
Different. BJ continued to lose. No, Chris,
the UFC always tries to capitalize off older fighters and give them to younger ones. It happens every single
younger
week.
Ones that are on a rise. Ihor looked terrible against Nega Mariano.
I know, but Craig, Shogun Rua hasn't looked good in 5 years. There's not a single performance you can point to and say, wow, he was really taking over that fight. It's
4 years ago, he fought Tyson Pedro,
who tore his ACL. He was losing the fight up until that. My point is with Shogun, you can't just keep on saying, oh, he was great. Like, I agree with you. We both love this guy for what he has done. But Jamal Crawford scored like 50 his last season when he was in his 40s. It's cool. Like, every now and then you can turn the clock back. But on a consistent basis, it never ends well for MMA fighters. And combat sports fighters in general. Like, Roy Jones Jr., one of the greatest ever. It ended sad for him. Shogun hasn't looked like the prime version of himself in a really long time. And I wish I could sit here and tell people, hey, we're going to see that combination version. He's throwing the low kicks. He's throwing the overhand left. We haven't seen that guy in a long time, though.
I mean, Ihor Potieria is a master of sport and combat sambo who has no takedown defense and gets hit like it's going out of style.
He's fighting a 42-year-old man. 41-year-old, sorry.
41-year-old
Shogun in his prime for 10. Shogun, who has only won 3 fights in a row in the UFC one time in his whole career.
What was that? Repeat yourself.
Shogun has only won 3 fights in a row in his UFC career one time. And it was against Nogueira, Corey Anderson, and Jean Vellante. My point is, Shogun hasn't even necessarily been in his prime in the UFC. He's been in the UFC for 12 years now.
You consider that the Pedro win, the terrible fight against Paul Craig, the split decision that was awful against Lil Nog. The trouble that I have with this matchup is, as excited as people might get about the younger fighter, Ihor Potieria, he's bounced around gyms before this fight. You don't really necessarily like to see that one. The fan vote on this, 74% going with Potieria. I like the fact that Potieria, southpaw, he can really throw a great right hook counter to a lot of his opponents. So if he catches Rua in on one of those blitzes, that's his biggest shot and his biggest opportunity. But Potieria is a huge defensive liability. His record is incredibly flawed, and Potieria might be able to win this fight against Shogun. I don't have a high ceiling on the poor young fella at all.
I genuinely think everybody looks at it that way, though. Like, I don't think anybody in the world is looking at this as, wow, Peteria's going to go on a run. I just think everybody at this point is very realistic about where Shogun is in his career. Like, I don't think the votes reflect, wow, people think Ihor's the next, like, coming of Johnny Walker when he was in his prime. Like, Shogun's just well past it. That's all it is.
All right, Matt, we get into the next fight. Matthew Rolla. Move to the main card already, please. Matthew Rolla, fan of the show. Paul Craig's taking on Johnny Walker. And Matt, for Paul Craig, why did he get rid of the good hair?
It is a good question.
Yeah, like he was salon quality Paul Craig until he loses to Volkan Oezdemir. He still keeps the hair in his training montages, and then he shaves it all off. Like Paul Craig, a guy who's training in his gym at home before his fight against Volkan Oezdemir and wearing a Kevin Love jersey. That's probably why he lost that fight against Volkan Oezdemir. K Love, all-star.
How dare you?
You look at this matchup, Matt, and obviously it's striker versus grappler, and Johnny Walker, submission artist under coach John Kavanagh. Johnny Walker walks the streets after he wins a fight, and then they give him $50K. For Walker, he's the more explosive fighter. He's the much better striker. He is a very good fighter. It just defensively struggles when he gets so overwhelmed in his fights. He's like my younger dog, Chuck. Like, he just gets way too excited and doesn't know what to do with himself.
But this is the thing that he has proved. Johnny Walker has those, like, Travis Brown elbows. He's got really good in-close power for being as big of a guy as he is. And Paul Craig likes to work for takedowns, and he doesn't normally get them on the first try. So he has to keep on wrestling and put himself in some vulnerable positions. And I understand that that's how Paul Craig has to fight. Like, if he gets it on the ground, he is a shark, and that is his water. But the problem is, at distance, Johnny Walker should pick him apart. At the middle range, it might be awkward because Johnny Walker is only good from really far away or really up close. With the middle range, it might be weird, but up close, he's very, very damaging. And I think for all those reasons, Paul Craig's going to have a really hard time. This might be a bit of a stale fight to watch because you might get one of those Paul Craig gets hurt in the first exchange and then just resorts to like butt scooting across the cage. But knowing what we know based on Johnny Walker's last performance, we know that, hey, he's not a complete zero on the mat by any means. I'm not saying I want him to grapple with Paul Craig by any world. I don't want that to happen. Jamal Hill proved that. You just don't want to mess with this guy. But I think Walker is just so much better of a striker that he should be able to win this one.
I mean, Jamal Hill, I won't bend, I won't break. You bent and you broke one time. And Paul Craig is like the boogeyman out there. But I look at this fight, Matt. I mean, Johnny Walker spent a lot of his last camp training the takedowns. He's been training for this camp, aka Thailand, as well as SBG Ireland. Camps that are all the way focused on Johnny Walker, not somebody else. So I do like to see that for Johnny Walker. Same thing can be said for Paul Craig. But for me, I like Walker in the matchup. Again, you have a look at Fight Night Picks. This one's really close. MPTV, it's too bad the Raptors are playing the Celtics today. Matt,
they're going to get destroyed.
Or Raptors. They will. 52% of the fans going with Johnny Walker to get the win. Mike Rosk is asking about Paul Craig's nickname. You got to watch, what's the movie with Brad Pitt?
Glorious Bastards. It's Eli Roth's character in it.
Exactamundo. So both of us going with Johnny Walker in the matchup. Matt, lucky Lauren Murphy taking on Jessica Andrade over 500. Tuning in for the matchup. Andrade, one of the GOATs of women's MMA. Lauren Murphy, great underdog story. Lauren Murphy in this match trains at a great camp, moved it over to Colorado. She's training with Miranda Maverick, training with Rose Namajunas, who has a win over Andrade and a loss. She also trains at Heritage Muay Thai. Matt Schnell, Eve Edwards, and the crew. Her husband's a great coach as well. You look at this matchup, Matt. For me, for Lauren Murphy, maybe she's able to drag a fight out at Jessica Andrade and win it on points. But that's about it that I can see in a matchup like this. She just kind of takes the punishment and keeps on chugging, like Penne or Juliana Pena versus Amanda Nunes.
That's the cool thing about Andrade, though. Like, Andrade has a genuinely great gas tank for how physically strong of a fighter that she is. Like, normally when you go for takedowns, when you just lift your opponent over your head and slam them into the ground, and when you throw everything for a knockout, you tend to get tired of the first or second round, but Jessica Andrade can keep that fighting style going into the fourth round, into the fifth round. Like, it kind of is incredible what her skill set is. But again, Andrade reminds me a lot of like an Allen Iverson type, or just anybody who does rely a lot on their athleticism. And I know MMA is not really a sport that's littered with a lot of these like super top tier X Factor type athletes, but Jessica Andrade for her size is one of those types of fighters. She does have the gas tank, she has the power, she has the speed, she has really good output too. I just think this is a difficult matchup for Lauren Murphy. Like, I understand she has to take it to try to get back to a title shot, but in this division, it does seem to be Valentina Shevchenko right now. And I guess other contenders are starting to get closer to her. I guess I had mentioned that in the earlier video this week.
Yeah, Fyodor, Blanchfield, yeah.
But Andrade is right there, too, gatekeeping the top of this division. It's a little bit like Israel Adesanya and Robert Whittaker, where it was like, hey, you don't get to fight him unless you beat me. And Jessica Andrade kind of is that gatekeeper for the number one contender right now. I like Lauren Murphy's lasting ability and her durability, but I could see that just getting her into a really ugly fight, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, and I know, like, Elizabeth Morris, how is this main card fight? You guys got to move on. I mean, listen, Elizabeth Morris, Lauren Murphy won a fight of the night one time in 2016 against Kelly Faschholz. And Jessica Andrade has what in the UFC? 5 performance bonuses and 4 fight of the night. So I'll go with Andrade in this one. Obviously, she's higher in fight miles, even though she's only 31 and Lauren Murphy's 39. But I have Jessica Andrade in this fight as well. Matt, we move into our next fight. Gilbert Burns taking on Neil Magny. Neil Magny, did he train with Chimaev? Is that what he's talked about this week? Yeah, I guess, apparently. Khamzat Chimaev. I don't like the guy anymore. Don't like him. But Khamzat Chimaev getting Neil Magny ready for the fight. Now, for Gilbert Burns, we know how good of an offensive wrestler he can be against good defensive grapplers. That's kind of the thing. But the last time we saw a big push out of Gilbert Burns in a fight in this division, it was Gilbert Burns when he took on Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, who looked pretty good his last time out. So Burns was able to go out there, get the takedowns, make it boring, but get the win. Fight. So Burns in this matchup with Neil Magny, Matt, it could be fun if they strike. It could be something if they grapple. But Neil Magny's shown that he's so well-rounded, but he can struggle against some guys that are a little bit shorter with the takedown propensity of Burns. And I just go back in my head and I think, geez, the guy can fight a little bit like RDA. And I saw what happened in that fight. Maybe that's my fault. Maybe I shouldn't put too much stock into just that one fight, but that's kind of how I look at this fight.
I worry a little bit about how much tread Gilbert Burns has left on the tires, if I'm being completely honest. Like, people were concerned he was a little bit chinny before the Chimaev fight. He got hurt quite a few times in that matchup. I know he made it to a decision, but he gets dropped early on in the fight. In the third round, he is getting hurt pretty bad after he scores his own knockdown. Like, Chimaev's marching him down with his own boxing, and maybe Neil Magny has improved some of his takedown defense quite a bit. Like, if he is training with Khamzat, I don't know how he wouldn't be able to. Like, I'm sure that is an asset for a guy like Neil Magny. The problem is, if that initial takedown defense does fail, he's going to have to grapple with Gilbert Burns. And we've seen Gilbert Burns have very good success against guys once their backs hit the mat. Now, yes, Wonderboy had a really interesting plan in that fight. He framed against the fence and got his back against the fence. So he basically just knew that, hey, Gilbert Burns is going to be in front of me. I might lose the position here or there, but he's not going to get on my back and choke me out, which is where you definitely don't want a guy like Gilbert Burns. I think the kicking range of Gilbert Burns is a really important thing, though, that we haven't talked about a lot. I know we don't always see it, but just go back to the Tyron Woodley fight. He went for that body kick a lot in that matchup and the leg kicks too. And I think we will see a lot of that against Neil Magny, because Neil Magny, if you want 2 fights where he's really had trouble with specialists, it's the RDA fight where he struggled with the grappler, and then the Lorenz Larkin fight where he gets his legs kicked apart in the first round. I think if Burns can use that to his advantage early on, he's just going to make Magny that much more of a stationary target.
Winker hits up the super chat. Gilbert Burns in Brazil. This fight's going to be crazy. It's definitely going to be crazy. The chants are going to be there. There's a couple different things that I can see, and I agree with the comps that you made. And for Neil Magny, if you want to kind of go back and go against us, you could say, well, guys, remember Neil Magny's fight against Rocco Martin? He was able to defend some of the takedowns.
How many World Jiu-Jitsu titles does Rocco Martin have?
But he's a good wrestler. That's the whole point.
No, I'm just saying, there's specialists and then there's good wrestlers.
Yes. And that's why Gilbert Burns has been able to get to the top of the rankings in a second division, and Rocco Martin struggled to do that. But when you do look at this, it is a very interesting fight. I do have Gilbert Burns in the matchup. I think striking for striking's sake, I think he can kind of chip away at Neil Magny. Now, again, we've seen Gilbert Burns in some tough fights, especially lately. But for Neil Magny, it's just out of his last 3 sample size, 2 wins and a loss. The fight against Max Griffin, he gets dropped early. He doesn't take the shots very well. Against Shavkat, you don't get much of a sample size because he gets taken down. He gets finished. And then in the fight against Danny Rodriguez, he got pieced up, second round. And then into the third round, he was able to get himself back into it, had that crazy kind of come from behind submission. So a very, very fun fight, Matt. Go ahead.
Just last thing. Does Gilbert Burns have to fight like Shavkat next? Or just they give him the opportunity to fight like a Colby Covington or like a bigger name in the division? I just think for Gilbert, he's in that weird position where he does seem to say yes to every single fight no matter what. Like, that's the great thing about Gilbert Burns. He can fight on short notice. He can fight basically anybody, anytime, anywhere. Does the UFC try to take advantage of that and kind of feed him to a guy like Shavkat, or has he deserved another big name in the division? Because I think you can go both ways.
I mean, I don't know if Jorge Masvidal fights anymore. If he does, I don't know who he takes a fight with. And obviously Nate Diaz is gone, and Gilbert Burns was always calling out Nate Diaz. So you got to go with one of those top guys. They wouldn't rematch him against Wonderboy. Maybe if Jeff Neal wins his next fight, they put them against each other. It's going to be tough that way. But we'll move forward. People saw it. The co-main event, Matt, the fourth fight between Deiveson Figueiredo, Brandon Moreno, 500 or so tuning in. Toss those likes in here, and we'll really talk about this fight because, Matt, Deiveson Figueiredo, he was making the weight, and 2 days out, he was taking pictures like, I'm on weight, I'm looking good, and he got on the scale, and he didn't look like death. So, Deiveson Figueiredo, I thought it was one of the better weight cuts he's had in a bit. Go ahead.
This is my thoughts on that. When I initially saw those pictures, I was a little bit worried about his weight cut. This is what I'm going to say. He looks the exact same as all of his other weight cuts. He doesn't look better or worse. They put all four of his last weigh-ins all next to each other. He looks the exact same. So here's the thing. Maybe it's not a big deal.
No sunglasses. Maybe the eyes weren't as sunken in, I guess. I don't know.
No, he looks the exact same. I cannot stress this enough. Like, you couldn't, if it's one of those spot 10 differences pictures, you couldn't spot 10 differences. My point is, though, for Figueiredo at 35 years old, I do still worry about that weight cut. That's the one thing. His age is catching up to him. And I saw that stat come out this week. The last time Deiveson Figueiredo fought somebody who wasn't Brandon Moreno, he was 32 years old. He's 35 now, and I know he just turned 35, but that's kind of a wild stat.
Is that not an Alex Bakunin tweet? Was that who it was? Or was Mikey
I don't
Thomas?
remember everything I see on Twitter all the time.
Perhaps. You got to try and get props where you can.
My point, well, anybody could see that on Tapology. My point is, Brandon Moreno at least has a fresh matchup and a fresh camp in there. And maybe that doesn't mean everything. And I know he didn't look as good against Kai Kara France as some people maybe wanted him to. But here's the thing. If you watch their first fight, it was really competitive. And if you use that fight to then try to predict the second fight, you knew that was going to be a difficult fight for Brandon Moreno. I just do like the fact that he had to train for another guy in there. And maybe I'm looking into it too much, but I just like the variety that Brandon Moreno has been able to display as of late. And I worry a little bit about the weight cut with Figueiredo. And like I've said, these guys could fight 25 times. I'd be excited for all 25 of them. And the odds would probably be close to par for all 25 of these fights. Like, that's how evenly matched they are. I just think that if I think they're close, and if Figueiredo keeps on getting a little bit older, that's why I have to pick Brandon Moreno. I just think he's got a little bit more youth on his side.
You look at Figueiredo in the UFC, drops Marco Beltran, drops Joseph Morales, drops John Moraga twice, drops Pantoja, he drops Benavidez, he drops Benavidez again, and then he dropped Moreno 3 times his last time out. Obviously, we know he's one of the more powerful fighters for the size of him in the entire UFC, and who wouldn't like a fight between Deiveson Figueiredo and one of Moraes or Demetrius Johnson, or like up a weight class, like the John Lineker, Fabrizio Andrade guys, like, or Piotr Jan. Like, there's so many different people that you can match him up and have a lot of fun. And I know, like, Kai Kara France, Clay saying Kai Kara France looked great until he got finished. He definitely did in that fight against Brandon Moreno. I don't know what Figueiredo is going to look like from this perspective. Listen, he looked amazing when he fought at a Fight Ready. These guys are 1-1-1. But when I do consider it, I mean, Figueiredo, he's older. Of course, everybody is. Who isn't? But when you look at it, he's training at Team Academy of Figueiredo back home in Brazil for this matchup. So it'll be interesting to see what we get out of that and that camp change, at least going back home. Now, that got him to the dance. And the last time that Figueiredo lost to somebody that wasn't Brandon Moreno, you know exactly who it was. Jussier Formiga beat him by decision back in 2019. Or Jared Brooks. We'll keep that one going. But for me, I still love the power of Figueiredo. I never say this, but the hometown advantage of fighting at home in Brazil against a guy like Moreno. And for Moreno, we'll see what all the camp changes and whatnot, what they mean to him, because he's talked so highly of Saif Saud and the quality of training partner that he's had for this camp, and getting to spend it with Saud, getting to spend it at the UFC Performance Institute with his home guys from Entram Gym, guys that he's brought in from other gyms. So I think it's going to be a very, very compelling fight. But my God, please just close the book on this chapter. Please.
I'm so excited for this fight, though, even though I've already seen it 3 times. Like, again, I love watching these guys match up against each other because they're both good at everything. Like, they could grapple for 5 rounds. It's going to be awesome. They could strike for 5 rounds. It's going to be awesome. Like, it doesn't matter where this fight takes place. They both have great cardio. Brandon Moreno dropped Figueiredo the second time, so he's got pretty good power, too. We know how good these guys are with grappling. It's just, these guys are like the pinnacle of MMA when it just comes to skill sets, and that's why I'm excited for the fight.
The comment of the week, Voodoo Wiz saying Moreno is the type of guy to wear a helmet while teaching his daughters how to ride a tricycle. That one wins. Go over to Teixeira, Jamal Hill. Matt, it's going to be a great fight. Kurtar saying Moreno is a dork. Hey, Kurtar, I've got baseball cards and signed gloves behind me. I don't know what you think a dork is, but maybe you consider me one of those and you're watching us. Matt, go over to Teixeira is taking on Jamal Hill. Jamal Hill's 5-1 with a no contest in the UFC. And he's getting a title shot. Like, how insane is that? The thing that dreams are made of. You love to see it.
Alex Pereira?
Well, yeah, Alex Pereira. Yeah, but he was different. He was a big-time champ. Jamal Hill's not Alex Pereira. He's not a double champ over in another, like, giant sport.
In a kickboxing organization?
In this matchup, Matt, go over to Teixeira taking on a very, very fun fighter in Jamal Hill. And Hill's the favorite in this matchup, which I still think is a surprise. Now, go over to Teixeira. Can he take a hit?
He's 43.
Within reason. Did against Yuri Prochazka until he didn't, and he got submitted. Did against Thiago Santos, and then somehow he just motored through it and submitted him. Like, go over to Teixeira is such an interesting fighter. But again, if he gets finished in this fight, I don't think anybody would be surprised. And that's why the odds are they favor Jamal Hill, who, again, gets this fight on short notice. Teixeira was already training for Prochazka at UFC 282, so he already had that camp, and then the rest of the time to train for Hill. Hill was getting ready for Anthony Smith to maybe get a title shot in like a year. So it's wild.
It is wild, but again, bringing this up, cool that Anthony Smith did help out Jamal Hill for this camp. Again, we don't often see cool stories like that in MMA, so shout out to Anthony Smith for just seeming to be a pretty good guy. But this is a weird fight, because if Glover gets hit one time in the chin, it might be over for him. Like, that's the type of power Jamal Hill does possess in his hands. And I know he faced some adversity against Thiago Santos. I'll bring up my same Thiago Santos point. I thought he looked better in that fight than he had fights previously. I did feel like Thiago Santos was looking more like himself after those knee injuries than he did when he first came off of them. But again, Glover Teixeira is better at most of the X's and O's of MMA than Jamal Hill. It just comes down to Jamal Hill is massive for this weight class, which I don't really think I talked about much at the earlier prediction thing, but Jamal Hill's as big of a light heavyweight as you can possibly get. Like, if him and Jailton Almeida squared off, I'm assuming they're looking at, like, you know what I mean?
The fight that we need to see is Jamal Hill, Ryan Spann, because Jamal Hill would just absolutely try and get in his head. Ryan Spann would do the cross my hands, look at the ground, not say anything back. Like, I would love to see that fight.
That would be, and Ryan Spann looked great against Dominic Reyes his last time out there. You're going to watch that left hand, but I just keep on going back to the fact that unless Glover gets stopped, he should be able to win. And I know that's a wild thing to say about a 45-year-old who has been hurt before. We just saw him get finished his last time out, but I still find myself thinking, hey, I've seen him go deep into fights. I've seen him face so much adversity, it's not even funny at this point in a lot of those fights. I think he can pass that big storm. But again, I've got to bring up the example. Remember when Rumble Johnson fought Glover? I never will, because here's what happened. Craig had friends over at his house. We were watching the pay-per-view. I went to go use the bathroom, and Glover Teixeira got knocked out, and I didn't see it. So my point is, we have seen him get hit by some of those one-hitter-quitter type of knockout strikes, and Jamal Hill, I'm here to tell you, has that kind of power in his hands. I just think that if Glover gets on top of him, he can ground him out and probably have a similar performance to the one that he had against Anthony Smith.
Todd had asked, does Jamal Hill have some of the worst tattoos? No, I don't have any, and I don't think you have any.
No, I don't
tattoos.
Care, though.
They're not good behavior. I don't care, but it's not good behavior. And you don't get a gift for Christmas that year. That's a Detective Crashmore quote. But Matt, in the matchup, I have Glover Teixeira, the well-roundedness. We know this. I do have Teixeira in this matchup. Jamal Hill, sweet dreams if he puts him out in the first round. It wouldn't surprise the masses, apparently, because, again, Hill is favored to win the fight. But, Matt, it should be a good fight. Go ahead.
Oh, I don't feel good picking a 43-year-old against a knockout artist. Like, I cannot stress that enough. No. But I am still picking Glover Teixeira.
Beat Sokoju and WEC. And that's the UFC Fight Pass video that they put out this week. So a lot of fun. I went back and watched that one for the fun of it. Matt, we'll start back at the bottom of the card, go all the way through it. Question mark kicks. As you know, Saimon Oliveira taking Daniel Marcos. And Matt, this is where I get out of my head and I don't pick the way that I normally pick. Who has a propensity to win by finish in more ways? It's Saimon Oliveira, but I'm picking Daniel Marcos.
I agree. I also have Marcos. Should be a fun fight, though.
Nunes, Fairn. I've got Nunes.
So do I. She hits incredibly hard.
Alves against Dalby. Stay away from this fight. It is popping popcorn. I have Warlley Alves.
A water and oil fight if there ever was one, but I also have Alves.
Terrance McKinney taking on Ismael Bonfim. I have Ismael Bonfim. Surprise.
Split on this one, but again, this is one of those, it's so close, it's almost not kind of fights, but I have Terrance McKinney. I'm really excited for that fight.
Terrance McKinney starts them, and I look like a goober. Luan Lacerda taking on Cody Stamann. We'll see if Cody Stamann ends up in a fight like he did against Saidin Nurmagomedov, who just had a fight book, Matt, against your boy, call me Dragon, Jonathan Martinez. Saidin Nurmagomedov. Fun fight. I have Cody Stamann in this matchup.
That's a bad fight for Jonathan Martinez, but I also have Cody Stamann in the matchup.
I'm not answering on Moin Kerr's question in the super chat. That's inappropriate. Jailton Almeida taking on Shamil Abdurakhimov. Very fun fight. I've got Jailton Almeida.
I also have Jailton Almeida. Again, I think he's better at most skills than Shamil Abdurakhimov at this stage of his career. What I've said about Shamil on multiple occasions is he has a good, like, his MMA game plan is centered around his wrestling if he's going to have a lot of success. But at this point of his career, the wrestling tires him out. So I just don't really know what he's going to be able to do unless he just starches him with like a big looping left hook.
Travis Duarte saying, this is a family show, LOL. Yeah, we try and cut down on the cursing. I let one F-bomb fly this week, but again, YouTube's really cracking down on it. We don't curse very often on the show anyway. Gabriel Bonfim's taking on Mounir Lazzez. I have two Bonfims to win, but this fight, just like the T-Rex fight, if Mounir Lazzez won this one, I wouldn't be surprised at all.
I like Bonfim a lot more in this fight, though, than I do the other one, mainly because I have Terrance McKinney in the other one. But yeah, should be a really fun one. I have Gabriel Bonfim.
Should be a fun one. Thiago Moises taking on Milk Costa. I got Moises.
So do I. But it should be a fun one. Again, Moises is just so good at grappling, though.
All right. Gregory Rodriguez taking on Bruno Ferreira, going with Gregory Rodriguez. The most, like, it's not oil and water. It's like oil and oil.
It's like TNT and TNT. Like, someone's getting knocked out. That's all. The only guarantee I have is that this probably won't go to a judge's scorecard. So it should be a fun one. Like, Bruno hits incredibly hard. What?
Be gone, Charles Barkley. TNT. All right, we'll look into the next one. Shogun, who is taking on Ihor Potieria. I can make basketball references too. I have Ihor Potieria. The fight hurts my heart. And my wife, when we're watching this, because we'll watch this one on the couch. Why not? She's gonna have no friggin' clue who this bag of milk's gonna be. It breaks my heart.
I can only imagine. Craig's gonna be on one couch, like tears in his eyes. Amanda's like, "Why are you crying?" Just like, you don't get it, okay? This guy was my hero. I'd love to see Shogun win, but he's probably not going to. He is an old man who hasn't been in his prime for a long time. I don't feel good saying those words, but it's just the truth, and there's nothing wrong with that. Was Michael Jordan as good with the Wizards as he was with the Bulls? No. He was still really good when he was with the Bulls, though. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, the comments are starting to get squirrely now. Yeah, we got Paul Craig taking on Johnny Walker. I'm going to go with Johnny Walker. Daniel Arcari just trying to beat me up. Talking about fighting and crying. I mean, Bud, fighters cry all the time, guy. Yeah, I have Johnny Walker, Matt.
Again, Johnny Walker looked pretty good in the grappling his last time out. Not that Ion Cutelaba is on the same level of grappling as a guy like Paul Craig, or that they're the same kind of grapplers, but Craig, unless he does get one of those Hail Mary submissions on his back, I don't think he's going to be able to win this fight. I do like Johnny Walker's ability to damage him from the outside.
All right. Todd saying Dorks Unite, and Daniel's just trying to make fun of me. Lauren Murphy's taking on Jessica Andrade. Matt, I've got Jessica Andrade here, the former champ.
So do I. I think Jessica Andrade is quite a bit better in this matchup.
All right. Burns taking on Magny. I've got Gilbert Burns.
This is a weird matchup for Neil Magny, if I'm being honest. Like, he's well-rounded, but he struggles with guys who hit really hard or are incredible at jiu-jitsu. Gilbert Burns just so happens to fall into both of those categories, so I have Gilbert Burns.
All right. Figueiredo's taking on Moreno. An amazing fight in the fourth installment. We're split on this one. I'm going Figueiredo. You got Moreno.
I've got Moreno, but it's kind of wild. Like, not that this is career-defining, but you really can't talk about Brandon Moreno or Deiveson Figueiredo without bringing up the other one at this stage of their career. So this is a really important fight to get the second win, get the rivalry in their favor. So I'm incredibly excited.
All right. And then in the main event, Matt, ooh, boy, we have Glover Teixeira taking on Jamal Hill for the light heavyweight title. It's an amazing fight. It's a fun fight. It's kind of an unseen fight or an unforeseen fight because originally Blachowicz and Ankalaev were for the title. And then that one ended in a draw. And Dana White, they weren't happy about it, so they made this, and now it's for the title. It's for the real title. It's the undisputed title, even though, Prohashka gave it away. So I have Glover Teixeira. Again, contradicting myself right at the start. I'd Simon Oliveira has more methods of victory. He's also from Brazil, but I'm going with Marcos. In this one, Glover Teixeira has more methods of victory. I'll take Teixeira, but my goodness, does Jamal Hill ever hit hard?
And he's got pretty good cardio too. That's the thing. Like, for being a big guy in the division who does have very heavy hands, you probably don't assume that he carries his power very late, but he does. And he throws good kicks too. That's the thing about him. Like, he uses his 6'4" range to the best of his abilities. And I think that'll be a really key factor in this fight, because up close, Glover has phenomenal boxing. Like, he can slip punches, throw tight hooks, but at range is where Jamal Hill should be able to have a lot of his success. I just think Glover's going to be able to get on top and really dominate from that top position, because when Glover gets in that spot, like, it's ground and pound, it's getting to your back. Like, there's a lot to think about.
Well, it's a big time card, Matt. UFC 283. I'll give it out there as a little bit of a, you guys tuned in for this long. You guys deserve this. So next weekend, there's no UFC card. Think of something that we'll kind of throw out there for you guys at the channel. You got to check it out, though. You got to check it out. The MMA awards from 2022, the MMA nickname tier list. We got to start seeing some views on those, because we like to make different content that's not just the previews and predictions. So please check that out. Work really hard on that stuff. But when we move forward and we look at the next card, it's Lewis versus Spivak. It's a remix, because that was supposed to be a main event at the end of last year. And then it ended up being Kennedy and Zechiku versus Iwan Kutsalaba's main event of UFC card. But it's Spivak versus Lewis. It's also the finals of the road to the UFC. So for that, I'm not making the thumbnail for that one. I've commissioned it. We're going to try and make it look like a JMMA type thing, because it was a road to the UFC that focused primarily on, you know, the UFC's presence in Asia with the fighters that are involved. So a really, really cool thumbnail I think we're going to have coming out of that one. Credit to G's FX over there on Instagram. You guys know him. He does great work. So make sure you check that out. Check out all the content that's coming out on Fight Night Picks. Enjoy the fights tonight, folks. Matt, under the weather. No sidekick this time. We will be back at you with some different content. Make sure you check that out. And as we always say, Matt, with Fight Night Picks,
let's get into it.
Let's get into it.